The text from Deuteronomy that we heard just a few moments ago is called the Shema, and it forms one of the central texts in Judaism. It is the words that call together the community as they gather every time. It's a call to identity. Hear, O Israel, our God is one. These words permeate a sense of belonging. They create that shared sense that let the people of God know who they are and remind them of who they are to be in the world. Now, I think because it sits in the book of Deuteronomy, amid the books of law, that sometimes we as Christians struggle with that a little bit. Sometimes I think we hear most of these stories, particularly as they get caught in the legalistic texts, as obligation, as rules to live by. And I think somehow we miss the significance of those because we have disconnected them from the story of God moving in every aspect of life. If you go back to the original communities that would have known these texts, they didn't hear them just on a Sunday morning when they were gathering together. They also didn't hear them as a set of rules and obligations. These were the things that were shared around campfires, that were never separated from the great stories of the Exodus, of God's salvation of the people, of God who acted to liberate those who were oppressed, to give a place to those who had no place. In this context, this idea of reciting and knowing and getting these stories deep into your bones and then making sure they were deep in the bones and the existence of your children were a way of sharing that ongoing presence of God in every aspect and dimension of life. It wasn't that you were supposed to layer on something else that somehow was separate from regular life, but it was that this ongoing movement of God's presence was part of everything that was. In many ways, I think that this text probably played and still plays within the Jewish community much more like the blessing we heard from Jan Richardson, that has words that say, "This is the blessing that writes itself in your sleeping. It inscribes itself in your waking. It twines itself through your heart with every beat." It's that blessing that we live within. And what we're called to do is share that story. Ultimately, I think that our faith is really about being witnesses and storytellers to this ongoing movement of love and grace and healing and forgiveness that we each experience throughout our lives. I think that we sometimes overcomplicate what our work really is as the people of God, particularly what our work with our children and youth is with the people of God. Marion Plant, who is a Christian educator, has a great little quote where she says that Jesus welcomed children and taught adults. We welcome adults and teach children. Someone has it backwards, and I don't think it's Jesus. So much energy within the life of the church gets spent in thinking that our primary work with children is to educate them, is to somehow make sure they come away with a right set of beliefs and values and stories and all of those kinds of things. And as a Christian educator, I'm not going to say that the content doesn't matter, because it does. Our theology matters, what we teach matters. But most importantly with children is that they experience the love of God whenever they are gathered in a community, that they know that they are beloved, and they know that they are gifted beyond their wildest imagination. And actually, the most important thing that we can do as adults is share the story of what matters most to us, is to be witnesses and storytellers to where we have experienced the love of God, where we have seen God at work in the world, where we have seen the people of God engage in the struggle for justice and peace, and to constantly tell those stories, the stories that actually have saved our lives. That's what our children need most to hear. I think sometimes it's easy to feel that we are inadequate to that task, that somehow we don't actually have enough or know enough or are not articulate enough to do that work. And the one thing I would like to make sure you all know is that you actually already have all that you need to do this work of forming one another, of nurturing the faith in each one gathered here, and especially in nurturing the faith and inviting our children into this lifelong journey. I don't really know you all, and I know that. I know that deep within myself, because I know that you are all beloved children of God, gifted beyond your wildest imagining. And if that is true, then you already have all that you need. Elizabeth O'Connor says that a primary purpose of the church is to help us discover our gifts and to hold us accountable to them in the face of our fears. I think this is a huge problem, not just in the life of the church, but within our culture in general, is that we are so fearful, again, that we don't have what we need. We're not up to the task of teaching and nurturing. We're not up to the task of engaging the hard work of justice in our world, of working toward equity and equality and peace. And again, It's within the life of community, this shared space of worship that we gather in, that we can help one another move beyond that. And within that, within these spaces where we come to remember and to rehearse, we also have the opportunity to share this with our children. Craig Nesson, who is a Lutheran pastor, likes to say that when the church gathers every Sunday for worship, what they're really doing, what we are really doing, is rehearsing for life in the realm of God. So what we're doing here today is rehearsing for the life that we are called to live when we move out beyond these walls. That's something that I hope begins to shift a perspective for folks when they think about what we're doing when we gather together. I think that has some implications too for what we do with children when we gather in community. That each time they're part of this worshiping community, each time they hear songs of our faith and they hear the stories of our tradition, and most importantly, they hear stories from each one of you of the way you have experienced grace in the face of another person, the way you have been able to share love with another, the way you have been able to engage in the work that God is calling us to in the world. You are offering them a glimpse of what it means to be the people of God. So I hope that as you continue to discern what your work is in this realm of faith formation with children, but also lifelong faith formation for the entire community, you begin to realize that you are all equipped and you are all called to be the witnesses and the storytellers of our faith. The story really is ours to tell. The story that matters most is the story of your unfolding life of faith, of your unfolding life together as the people of God, figuring out where God is calling your unique constellation of gifts to action in the world. Again, I hope that we begin to hear the call to a life of blessing, where these practices and rhythms, the sharing of worship, the sharing of prayer, the invitation to help hold parents gently and equip them in their work of nurturing children as a way of beginning to engage the practices that allow the people of God to more fully enter into an experience of God's blessing in every moment of life. As Jan Richardson reminds us, this is the blessing that twines through your heart with every beat, that lays itself across your brow in every moment, that breathes with you in every breath, so that even in your resting you know, even in your slumber you are aware, and even in your dreaming, your heart keeps time with the voice that calls to you, awake, awake, awake. May it be so. Amen.